About 2 years ago, I set out to make commentary videos for every Night in the Woods character worth analyzing. We've talked about Greg and Bee, the very different roles they play in the game, and how they impact the themes of the narrative in equally disparate ways. We've covered the cult extensively, examining Ide, its most noteworthy member, and all of the people who fans have suspicions about, from Aunt Molly to the city council, and even Mr. Twigmeyer and Mr. Penderson. We've discussed minor characters like Selmers and Mr. Chazikov, and even some background folks that you probably didn't think I'd actually be able to make a video on, like Cole and Jackie. Of course, there's one very important character whose name I haven't said yet. A character who's so essential to Night in the Woods that without them, we wouldn't be here at all. The game's protagonist herself, Mae Borowski. As the leading lady of Night in the Woods, Mae serves as the gas in the game's narrative engine, driving players through the quarter-life existential crisis that unfolds upon her return to Possum Springs. Through Mae, the player has the perfect lens through which to explore topics like economic hardship, mental illness, and the multifaceted realities of the Rust Belt. And at the end of her story, she carries home the game's core message, that nothing will save you forever, but a lot of things can save you today. But before I go on, if you are a Night in the Woods fan, then please be sure to like, subscribe, and consider supporting me with a YouTube channel membership or over on Patreon. My dream is to make these videos full-time someday and create awesome Night in the Woods content for years to come. By doing any of those things, you'll be helping make that dream a reality. Night in the Woods begins with a poem. It's often overlooked, as I've discussed in other videos, but it tells us a lot about Mae's mindset upon her return to Possum Springs. No matter which options you pick, it's a clear expression of grief over the death of her grandfather, something that she has yet to recover from. It's on that depressing note that the game opens, and very quickly we move on to something equally bleak: Mae's realization that her parents aren't there to pick her up from the bus station. It's not clear which party is responsible for this communication breakdown, but as someone who used public transportation, planes, buses, and trains, to get back home from college myself, I can only imagine how terrible she must feel at this point in the game. Couple this with the reason she's home in the first place, and you've got a recipe for disaster. For me, coming home from college, whether it was winter break, spring break, or just a long weekend, was usually a triumphant occasion. A time for celebration, to talk about the things that were going well, the friends I'd made, and to look forward to what was ahead. But Mae's return in Night in the Woods is anything but positive, at least at the start. She's back because she dropped out following a bout of mental illness that prevented her from socializing and attending classes. She's back because she failed. She was the first Borowski to attend college, something her parents were incredibly proud of. But she won't be the first to graduate, just the first to go and drop out. This failure is compounded when you examine the circumstances that allowed her to go to college in the first place. One of the many great things about Night in the Woods is how we find out about Mae's personality and backstory naturally. Just like a new friend you might make in the real world, or the leading man of a good book, we learn about her piece by piece. And as you trek through the early hours of her return to Possum Springs, you'll eventually hear about the killer incident. The killer incident is a harrowing moment from Mae's past, where she had an episode of disassociation and savagely attacked a kid named Andy Cullen with a baseball bat. As a result, the people of Possum Springs treat her with quite a bit of trepidation. They warned their kids to stay away from her, and people like Mr. Penderson are determined to make sure that she never forgets what she did. Unfortunately for Mae, being treated as a pariah was not the only consequence of the killer incident. Andy suffered serious injuries from Mae's outburst. She attacked him with a bat. It's not hard to imagine how terrible his wounds must have been, and the amount of surgery and therapy he likely needed to go through to recover, if he ever truly recovered at all. He no doubt came away from the killer incident with a traumatic brain injury, and that's the type of thing that never really stops haunting a person. It affects your mood, your mental health, your memory, and your ability to perform many of life's basic functions. all of this is to say that the human cost of the killer incident goes beyond just how it revealed Mae's episodes of depersonalization. It impacted Andy Cullen in a way that would forever change his life. And as a result, Mae's family paid a heavy toll to clean things up. It's never said exactly how much Mae's family had to pay to make amends with Andy and his family, but it was certainly a lot. It's likely that they paid for his medical bills, therapy, and so much more. The way that Mae's mom talks about it later in the game leads me to believe that there was a settlement of some kind. A settlement that was, in all likelihood, necessary to avoid legal repercussions for Mae. Paying this off put the Borowskis in a serious financial hole, a hole that jeopardized their plans to send Mae to college. To counteract this, Mae's family took out a second mortgage on their house. A mortgage that, according to Mae's mom, was given to them by a predatory lender, and on terms that were not at all favorable to their family. At the end of the game, this matter is still up in the air, and there's a very real possibility that they might end up losing their family home. And after all that, after spending a ton of money to smooth over the aftermath of the killer incident, taking on a predatory second mortgage that might leave them homeless, and spending what money they did get back from the deal to get Mae to college, she just drops out. All of this produces a sense of failure as Mae returns home. Failure for her. Failure for her family. It's something that players certainly notice on a replay thanks to their familiarity with her situation. But even for folks new to Night in the Woods, the sense of dashed hopes and dreams is inescapable as Mae leaves the bus station and ventures through the woods. We see the failure of Possum Springs, of Middle America, of the Rust Belt, as she wades through litter and the dilapidated playground on her way back home. It's interesting to note that along the way, the game forces you to take a look at Mae's journal, where the first page serves as a bit of a callback to the opening poem, and a reminder of how crucial her grandfather's death is to all of the trauma she's dealing with. After a section that introduces the player to the game's platforming elements, Mae enters Possum Springs proper. It's here that we meet Aunt Molly for the first time. It would be an understatement to say that Aunt Molly is, generally speaking, not particularly popular with members of the Night in the Woods community. I've been hard on Aunt Molly in the past, probably too hard on her to be honest, but make no mistake, I do believe that she really does care for Mae, knows that something rather suspicious is going on in Possum Springs, and wants to protect her. And in all likelihood, given what Mae and her friends find the next day, she probably did protect her from something. Something that might have prevented her from returning home at all. Thanks to a ride from Molly, Mae makes it back to her house, where she argues with her father about the communication breakdown from earlier. She then heads to bed for the night, ending the game's prologue. The next morning, Mae gets her first chance to talk with her mother. She, like any good mom, wants to know what's been going on with her daughter. She wants to know what forced her to come back home, to abandon all the plans they made as a family. But Mae's not willing to share any of that. Not yet. So she ventures out into Possum Springs, where some things have stayed the same, but others have changed quite a bit. The people, like Mr. Twigmeyer, Summers, and Mr. Chasakov, are just as she remembers them. But new businesses have come to town, including Snack Falcon, a convenience store not far from town center. There, she reunites with a friend who turns the narrative on its head, Greg Lee. As I've talked about in other videos, and will do so again later on in this one, Greg is an incredibly fun person to be around. Someone who wholeheartedly supports Mae in her every endeavor and wants to see her succeed. He's Mae's strongest soldier, her fan club president. But in doing so, he pulls Mae towards stagnation, towards continuing to be the free-spirited, spontaneous person she was when they were growing up. That's what he does in the long term, however. When Mae reunites with him here, he's a force for stability. Everything sucks forever for Mae when she comes back to Possum Springs. No one is truly excited to see her, except for Greg, who's overjoyed to have her back in his life. So he drags her off to participate in one of their old activities, band practice. The first band practice echoes so much of what Mae has been experiencing so far in the game. Just like the rest of Possum Springs, it's just about the same. Greg is shredding on guitar, Angus is singing, and they're playing pop-punkish tunes in a warehouse. But it's so very different from what she remembers. Casey is gone, replaced by B's computer. I spoke at length about this in my video on him, but as a bass player myself, I can't even begin to tell you just how difficult it must have been to play these songs without him. Bass and drums are the two most symbiotic instruments in a rock band. They rely on one another to hold down the rhythm of the music. For an amateur musician, playing with a different drummer can sometimes feel like learning a different language. No matter how good it must have felt to play with the garage band again, Casey's absence had to leave her feeling somewhat empty. A feeling that is surely reinforced when she learns that Casey is not only gone from the band, but gone from Possum Springs entirely. Over pizza at the Click Clack Diner, the group reveals that Casey left town, with the popular belief being that he jumped a train and is out there somewhere living the transient life. Mae's never really the same after this revelation. Coming home was difficult enough, but for Casey to be gone just makes things so much worse for her. We don't know exactly what her relationship with Casey was like, but I've long speculated that it was quite similar to what it was like in the band. Like a drummer and a bassist, I suspect that they held each other down, balanced each other out, and helped support each other in a symbiotic relationship. And from a plot perspective, I think the sadness that Mae surely felt about Casey's absence probably overshadowed her own suspicions about what happened to him. We know from later in the game that Mae is always down for a ghost story, a conspiracy theory, a detective mystery. So you'd think that Mae would have adopted a similar line of thinking when she heard about Casey, and assumed that something must have happened to him, and that he didn't simply up and leave. There are hints later in the game that suggest that she knows something's off about the whole thing, like when she asks Angel and the Krusties about him. But for the most part, I suspect that her sorrow about his supposed departure won out over her suspicion. And yet, Casey's absence isn't the only mystery Possum Springs has in store for our protagonist. After leaving the Click Clack, Mae and her cohorts discover a severed arm by the side of the road. It's one of the most iconic moments in the game, something that anyone who's played Night in the Woods surely remembers quite well. Mae is amused by it, finds it fascinating, which, again, covers for the suspicion she probably should have had here. Together, these two moments, the Casey reveal and finding the arm, serve as the inciting incident of the main plot of Night in the Woods. They lay dormant for a while and don't come up again until later, but they're major hints about where things are going. And part of the reason that they're not addressed right away is because for the early portion of the game, they play second fiddle to Mae's internal conflict. An internal conflict that will have its own inciting incident just a few days later. Molly sends Mae straight home after spoiling her fun with the arm, and from there, Mae spends much of her time continuing to cope with the return to a hometown that, as mentioned earlier, continues to be similar in so many ways, yet is now so different. Part of this is that although so many of those around her have changed, she herself has largely stayed the same. She's older, old enough to get a job, but while her friends, Greg, Angus, and B, are all working in town in some way, shape, or form, she's just languishing at home. Something that I don't see many folks comment on is the time that Mae wakes up every day. In one of Mae's earliest conversations with her mother, she mentions that it's 4 o'clock when Mae wakes up and comes downstairs. And we see no signs of this late wake-up time changing throughout the game. The sun always appears to be going down when Mae leaves her house to wander Possum Springs, and she frequently goes from popping in on her friends directly to an evening hangout, all of which supports this time frame. Regardless, I bring this up for 2 reasons. First, it's an early sign of her poor mental health. Depressed people have a tendency to sleep more than others, and given that Mae doesn't seem to be staying up all that late, it seems to me like she sleeps quite a lot. But it also helps to contrast her schedule and routine with those of her peers. They're working 9-to-5 jobs. She's aimlessly wandering about the town. It doesn't bother any of them other than B, at least not that we're ever made aware of. But it's a subtle way the developers show us that she's in a far different place than other folks her age. So what we have here, with Mae in the early game, is an abdication of adult responsibilities. And yet, she continues to deal with many adult topics, things like sexuality, as evidenced by the virus she gets on her computer, and economic hardship, as shown by the closure of Possibilities, her favorite restaurant. And before reaching the inciting incident of her personal conflict, when all these elements come together to form a true existential and mental health crisis, she'll need to deal with one more adult matter: alcohol. With the rest of the crew, minus Germ, who's off doing something, Mae attends a party in the woods. For anyone who's been in their 20s, it's a familiar setting. A mix of newly 21-year-olds and underage kids, a keg of cheap beer, a roaring fire, some douchebag playing guitar, and people you'd hoped you'd never have to see again after high school. Mae has some serious social anxiety about the whole thing right from the get-go. In fact, she starts having social anxiety long before she leaves, during the same segment where she expresses some feelings of body dysmorphia in front of the mirror. Crippled by this social anxiety, Mae indulges in some cheap, watered-down beer. I use the term indulge loosely. She has like 4 beers. But that is enough to severely impair a woman of her size and age. And as she reveals in a conversation with Angus and Greg, her father had issues with alcoholism, which no doubt impacts her own susceptibility to it. The greatest reason for her social anxiety in this scene is the presence of Cole, her ex-boyfriend from high school, with whom she had a disastrous experience at senior prom. We're never told why they broke up, but I suspect it had quite a bit to do with what happened that night. What happens here is the first of many what I'd like to call train wreck style segments that take place over the course of the game. We as players do have influence over what Mae says, but we have little control over what she does as far as the greater narrative is concerned, meaning that when the plot calls for her to do something dumb or say something dumb, we're stuck with choosing between bad dialogue option A and bad dialogue option B. And no matter which one we select, Mae is still going to drive that train right off the tracks. That's what happens here at the party. We're stuck controlling Mae as she drinks more than she should, makes awkward comments, brings up Angus's personal trauma, and then climbs on top of a log to deliver an unhinged rant that few will ever forget. She drops the infamous nightmare eyes line, hints at the episodes of depersonalization and struggles with depression that prevented her from succeeding at college, and then pukes all over the place. As we've already discussed, the discovery of the severed arm and the news of Casey's disappearance serve as a two-pronged inciting incident for the game's macro plot. But this moment right here is the inciting incident of Mae's own personal difficulties. The hints about her issues have been all over the game so far, but it's not until the Nightmare Eyes rant that the game really lays it all out there. For me personally, I remember the severed arm and the Casey plot point as the story beats that let me know on my first playthrough that this wasn't just going to be a cozy slice of life game, and the party as the story beat that told me Night in the Woods was going to be a piece of art that had a larger, deeper meaning behind it. A deeper meaning that centers around Mae's internal conflict. B is forced to drive Mae home, and it's during this ill-fated ride that we learn that B's mom died of cancer, and that our protagonist apparently was unaware of it. Whether or not this is accurate, or if this is a display of carelessness on the part of Mae, is better served for a future long-form video on B. But as far as Mae is concerned, it helps to show their fractured friendship, which the player will have an opportunity to repair if they're so inclined. When Mae finally reaches her bed and falls asleep, we continue to dive deeper into her personal crisis. What happens here is open to interpretation, and is something I'll dive into in greater detail at another time. But some folks interpret these segments as dreams that reflect her worsening mental state, while others have theorized that she is, in fact, astral projecting to other realms, thanks to the glimmer, her connection to the black goat. Both are valid, but I'm partial to the latter. No matter how you view them, however, they certainly shed light on her internal conflict. In the first of these dreams, or astral projection sequences, Mae returns to Derkillisburg, which I suspect is the in-universe equivalent of Pittsburgh, and probably where she went to college. Armed with a bat, she destroys everything from streetlights to neon signs, and most importantly, a replica of the statue that sat outside her dorm room. This statue, with its avant-garde design, is later implied to have reminded Mae of her past episodes of depersonalization, a fact that so terrified her that she stopped going to classes. So what we have here is a dream, or a realm, that fuses the two most noteworthy episodes of depersonalization that Mae ever dealt with: the killer incident, hence the bat, and the statue. And to overcome it, the way she was unable to at college, she uses that bat to destroy the statue. It's a symbolic way of demonstrating what she surely wanted to do to that statue in real life, and at the same time cluing us in to the deeper reason that she felt the need to avoid it in the first place. Yes, on the surface, it purely terrified her because it reminded her of her past issues with depersonalization. But take that a step further. A reminder of depersonalization at any level is by extension a reminder of what she did to Andy Cullen. Mae doesn't talk much about her feelings about what she did to him specifically, but she no doubt regrets it and fears that another episode of depersonalization might lead to her doing something similar again. Thus, with this dream, I don't think the developers are only showing us what Mae wanted to do to the statue, but what she feared she might do to someone else if continued exposure to it led to another episode of depersonalization. Mae wasn't just afraid of the statue, she was afraid of what it might cause her to do to others. I've always had a ton of sympathy for what Mae went through at college. I myself dealt with a mental health crisis in my sophomore year, at the same time as she did. But the more I examine the scene and its implications, I can't say enough about how terrible I feel for her. It must have been horrifying for her to know that she was not only suffering from depression and depersonalization, but also that as a result of these forces, there was a ticking time bomb inside of her that could, if pushed to the limit, cause her to commit an act of violence on par with the killer incident. When Mae wakes up, Part 2, Weird Autumn, begins. Weird Autumn is a continued dive into Mae's mental health, her past, and critically, her friendships. During Weird Autumn, Mae has the opportunity to hang out with B or Greg 3 times. How you approach these hangouts is up to you. You can divide them, or do a straight B or Greg run. I'll be taking a closer look into this choice and what factors you personally should consider before deciding which path to take. But for now, let's focus on how they affect Mae. Greg and B are both great friends for Mae, but for very different reasons. Greg represents spontaneity and joy. All of his hangouts are fun, adventurous, and engaging. This is reflected even from a design perspective. All of Greg's hangouts involve minigames. In the first one, we have to carry a box of robot parts up a set of stairs. In the second, we have to build that robot. And in the third, we get to shoot a crossbow and engage in a knife fight. So, in both narrative and gameplay, when Mae is with Greg, the developers are trying to make sure that we're having fun. That's the message they're trying to get across, that he's a fun guy to be around, who Mae can count on to make sure she has a good time. Don't get me wrong, these segments do have their heavier moments, like when Greg admits to his own mental health struggles in the woods. But the fact that Mae and Greg always have an enjoyable time together is the main takeaway here when it comes to their friendship dynamic. And that's something that Mae sorely needs at this point in the narrative. She's recovering from so many things: the unprocessed grief from the death of her grandfather, the bout of mental illness and depersonalization that forced her to leave college, and the disappearance of Casey. When you're in recovery, fun is something you really do need, and Greg provides that for her. But when examined with a more serious lens, Greg's hangouts don't teach Mae much of anything, or help her mature in any discernible way. It's escapism, which is valuable in its own right, especially for someone dealing with as many complicated issues as she is. You could argue that it gives her the strength to fight back against her mental illness, her depersonalization, and later on, the cult and the black goat. But on Greg's path, in no way does she confront her issues with taking responsibility, nor does he encourage her to grow up. At the end of the arc, he sort of does it by example when he explains his plan to move to Bright Harbor. But none of that arises naturally out of his hangouts. It's more of a byproduct of the final one, and it really only happens because Angus is there, giving the segment a more mature voice. Thus, I'd argue that Greg's route represents lighthearted fun and adventurous spontaneity, but also escapism and stagnation. This contrasts heavily with B's path. B's hangouts are far more serious, ranging from a visit to a dying mall to a family dinner that devolves into an exploration of their fractured friendship. These segments aren't without their fun moments. Shooting mallgoers with the water cannon, dealing with crazy Miss Miranda, and dancing at the college party come to mind, but the focus, primarily, is on more serious subjects. The trip to the mall highlights the economic realities of Rust Belt America. The visit to Miss Miranda's house isn't so much of a hangout as it is joining B at her job. And though the dinner at B's house starts out rather heartwarming, it ends horribly. All of these segments force Mae to deal with things she's running away from, whether it's the reality that Possum Springs is a dying town without much of a future, the fact that it's about time for her to get a job of her own, or the dark and depressing truth that as bad as Mae's situation is, there are people out there who would love to trade places with her, people like B who would have given anything to go to college. Just like with Greg's route, we see this in the game design as well. There aren't really any true minigames, though I suppose you could make the argument that using the water cannon basically counts as one. As a result, this makes B's hangouts less attractive to players, and I'd wager that most first-time players stick primarily to Greg's path rather than hers. I know for me personally, it wasn't until my second playthrough that I ended up giving B a chance, and came to understand why she treats Mae the way she does. Looking to other games, I'd compare B to characters like Vivian from Dragon Age Inquisition, Sten from Dragon Age Origins, or Mirage Dar from Oblivion. For the uninitiated, these are all characters who start their respective games as standoffish or simply difficult to like, but by the end have either warmed up to players or have been portrayed in a more sympathetic light. That's certainly the case with B. She's abrasive with Mae right from our introduction to her. Later says that she'd kick Mae out of a moving car if it meant she could go to college, and unloads on Mae in both the third and fourth hangouts. She can be tough to like, but even when she's hard on Mae, there's a grain of truth to her statements. Mae really does have some growing up to do, and she has some personal things to work out that go beyond her mental health issues. Earlier, I mentioned how there are points in the game where Mae ends up saying the wrong thing, and even when the game provides you with dialogue options, there's no way out of it. Both choices are varying degrees of bad. So many of these moments happen while Mae is with B. It happens at the dinner at B's hangout, where she fails to grasp the reality of B's economic and familial situation. And it happens again at the party, when Mae screws up B's night by exposing that she doesn't actually go to college, and is really stuck taking care of her dad's store, even though she is well aware that these are sore subjects for her. Saying foolish things and putting her foot in her mouth is a core part of Mae's personality, and one of her key character flaws. A character flaw that is regularly and routinely laid bare when she spends time with B. It's something she needs to work on, as she admits during her heart-to-heart with B by the river. As hard as some of these segments can be to watch, B's path presents Mae with an opportunity to examine and improve this part of her personality. When looking at her route as a whole, I'd argue that B's path represents tough love and difficult growth in a trial-by-fire sort of way. But to get to that, you have to take the time to really get to know her, appreciate her character, and stomach some serious drama. And for a lot of players, that's a challenging thing to do. Thus, the central question of the Weird Autumn chapter is whether or not you want to see Mae have some carefree, adventurous fun with Greg that might cause her to stagnate or suffer through some tough times with B that will, hopefully, inspire her to grow and work on herself. Before we move on, let's circle back to Mae's tendency to put her foot in her mouth for a moment. Whether it's the aforementioned hangouts with B, the blunt way she approaches conversations with several characters throughout the game, or just her general tendency to make things awkward, it would be generous to say that Mae's social skills are not one of her strong points. I am often asked if Mae is, perhaps, a person with autism. This is actually a topic that I am uniquely suited to speak to. Not only am I a Night in the Woods scholar, but in my day job, I'm an autistic support teacher, and I've been serving in that capacity in public and private schools throughout eastern Pennsylvania for the last 10 years. To be clear, this doesn't make me an expert on autism. but it does mean that I have quite a bit of experience in working with people with autism and recognizing its traits. And to me personally, I do see where folks are coming from with this speculation, but I think it misses the mark. Somewhat. To be more accurate, I'm not just an autistic support teacher. I also teach a social skills class that is attended by students with autism and students with emotional support needs. Emotional support is a somewhat broad diagnosis, but it covers students with depression, anxiety, or even students who experience episodes of dissociation that require flexible care and behavioral intervention throughout the school day. Mae reminds me a lot more of these students than she does my students with autism. And honestly, where I work, the killer incident alone probably would have been enough to get her an individualized education plan and placement in the emotional support program. I could go on about this topic for hours. It's something I'm very passionate about. But it's interesting to think about how different Mae's life might have been if she'd had access to these types of supports in the aftermath of the killer incident. School would have been easier for her. College might have even been easier for her, and it might not have taken some tough love from B to convince her to work on herself. But back to the plot. With the bulk of the pure hangout segments in the books, we advance to the game's halfway point, Harfest. Harfest, as I've said elsewhere, with the kidnapping of the Harfest kid, serves as a recurrence of the inciting incident, circling back to all of the dark speculation that arose after Mae discovered the severed arm outside of the Click-Clack. But it not only refocuses the plot, it refocuses Mae. As evidenced by our earlier discussions, up until this point in the game, our protagonist has been without much of a direction, just aimlessly wandering around with her friends. As harrowing a moment as the kidnapping is, it gives her a mission, a purpose, something to devote herself to other than just spending time with B and Greg. In terms of timing, it's really interesting to me that all of this takes place at Harfest. At roughly the midpoint of the game, Mae has started to settle in, to find a sense of comfortability amidst her aimless wanderings. In an odd way, the kidnapping prevents her from getting too used to having nothing of real importance to do. After witnessing the kidnapping and following Ide to the fence beyond the food donkey, Aunt Molly shows up again. Molly dismisses Mae's suggestion that the kidnapper was a ghost, but doesn't dismiss her concern entirely, at which point she insists on driving Mae home, just like she did back on day 1 with the severed arm. This dynamic between Mae and Aunt Molly is part of what makes the game's central mystery as good as it is. Mae doesn't like authority figures or following the rules, so she's naturally inclined to distrust her badge-wearing relative. As for Aunt Molly, it's clear to me that she cares for Mae, but can come off as condescending at times, and takes everything her niece says with a hefty pinch of salt. It's a shame that there really wouldn't have been any way to include more scenes with Aunt Molly without overexposing her to the events of the main plot, or ruining the opportunity to speculate about her true motives, because I do enjoy their overall dynamic and banter. Ironically enough, if the two of them had gotten on the same page, they might have been able to put away the cult much earlier. Either way, this marks the third time Molly drives Mae home after an incident of some kind, and the second time that she probably rescued her from some serious danger. That night, Mae has a dream that is far unlike any of the other ones she's had so far. In this dream, she walks through a dark, red-tinted forest until she reaches a mysterious well. This, much like all of Harfest, foreshadows the more serious turn the narrative is about to take. Mae's dreams aren't just minigames anymore, or explorations of her astral projection powers. They've now taken on a level of prophecy to them. And with that, the long fall begins. In the long fall, Mae focuses all of her efforts towards trying to figure out what happened to the Harfest kid. As mentioned by Aunt Molly, Mae loved detective stories growing up, and this is a real-life detective story. Her initial speculation is that the Harfest kid was abducted by a ghost. Of course, we all know that isn't what really happened, but if you were in Mae's position, what else would you think? Ide somehow carried his victim through a chain-link fence. At this point, Mae doesn't even know about the glimmer yet, So although she's way off in her hypothesis, I can't fault her much at all, because I would probably be thinking the same thing. Since she's hunting what she thinks is a ghost, Mae targets 3 locations in Possum Springs that are known for having supernatural activity: the Graveyard, Possum Jump, and the Historical Society. She'll only get to visit 2 of them, but something that stands out about these segments is, once again, her determination to solve this mystery. She's laser focused on getting to the bottom of this, and after so much aimless behavior during the early portion of the game, it's so cool to see her with such a pronounced sense of direction. Unfortunately for Mae, her newfound purpose doesn't really go much of anywhere in and of itself, as none of the 3 detective quests get her any closer to solving the mystery. Sure, she encounters Ide in 2 of them, and even gets an extended look at him up on Possum Jump, but it doesn't tell her anything about the real culprits: the cult. During this time period, 2 other very important plot lines are resolved as well. First, depending on who you spent the most time with, B or Greg, you'll get a final hangout with them. B's is the party we talked about earlier, while Greg's is the trip to Donut Wolf, that, in so many ways, has a lot in common with the themes of B's route. It's more focused on growing up, responsibility, and forces Mae to reckon with the fact that pretty soon some of her closest friends might be leaving Possum Springs for greener pastures. This chapter also marks the end of the dream segments. As soon as the long fall begins, the conversations around the dreams become far more serious. People comment on how tired Mae looks all the time, and she begins to discuss her dreams more openly. If you're trying to resolve a personal debate about whether these are dreams or astral projection segments, and once more, both views are valid, I'd say that Mae's tiredness and poor health is a point in the astral projection column. Because it seems to me that she's not actually sleeping at all, but instead is somewhere else entirely. In her final dream segment, Mae encounters a godlike being known as the Sky Cat, or she'll later dub it, the Ass Cat. It says that there's a hole at the center of everything, and that it's growing. All of this foreshadows where things are going, as signals to the player, and to Mae, that the narrative is about to get far more serious. It's a theme that, honestly, is echoed throughout the end of the long fall. Mae's dreams become more dramatic, her final hangout with B remains serious, and even in the world of usually carefree Greg, shit's getting real. The heightened drama reaches its peak at the end of the second ghost hunting quest. No matter who she's with, B, Greg, or Angus, she'll have an episode of disassociation. Everyone and everything is reduced to shapes, and she blacks out. When she wakes up, she rallies the troops, the entire party barn garage band, and journeys into the woods, knowing that that's where she'll find the answers to this ongoing mystery. In the woods, Mae ventures towards the mines, past old and dilapidated things, when she comes upon the cult of the Black Goat. She watches as they execute Lerv for leaving the severed arm outside of the Click-Clack, tying up that plot thread. But Mae's no solid snake, no expert of stealth, so she gasps, giving away her position up on the hill. The cult spots her, and it's important to note that at this distance and in this level of darkness, it sure seems like they're able to identify her based on her voice alone. This has led some fans, myself included, to speculate that this cult member is likely someone she knows. Personally, I think it's Mr. Twigmeyer, and if you'd like to hear more about that, you should check out this video from last year. Theories aside, it's clear that the cult was entirely unprepared for someone to drop in on them. They give chase, and out of desperation, shoot at her. The screen cuts to black, leaving the fate of our protagonist in doubt. It's on this bleak cliffhanger that the game's final chapter, the end of everything, begins. The end of everything is all about the game's disparate plot threads converging around Mae. At the start of it, Mae's well-being is very much up in the air. It kicks off with us controlling a different character, B or Greg, depending on who you spent more time with throughout the game. It's brilliantly done in that it forces the player to have some serious concern about Mae. The last time we saw her, she was getting shot at by the cult, so the natural conclusion here is that the bullet hit its mark, and that Mae is either dead or in critical condition. This is heightened by the fact that things are getting real for the other characters as well. The cult is keeping a close eye on them, preventing them from leaving Greg and Angus's apartment. All of this is key as far as the game's concluding drama is concerned, especially when it comes to Mae. For writers, it's very difficult to make your audience care about a world at large, or even a community. But you can make your audience care about individual characters. It's this moment here that should reveal to players just how much they care about Mae. If you're worried about her, if you're concerned that she's in the hospital or by St. Rebello dying in the woods somewhere, then the game has done its job and created a protagonist that you're truly invested in. It's impressive that the developers were able to deliver a moment like this and keep it as grounded and harrowing as it needs to be in a game like Night in the Woods. Sure, the game becomes more dramatic as it goes along, but rarely do we worry about the life and well-being of our protagonist in a game that starts out as a slice-of-life adventure. We do here, and that speaks not only to the strong progression of stakes despite the odd narrative structure of Night in the Woods, but more importantly, the job they did in making Mae a protagonist that we care about and cheer for. When we get back to controlling our protagonist, she's again dealing with strange and concerning dreams. She dreams that she's at the church, where all of the minor characters she spent significant time with are gathered. It functions a bit like one of those last conversation with your allies moments we see in BioWare RPGs, in that most of these characters, like Summers and Lori, express how much she means to them, and how much their friendship with her has improved their lives. We also see her in a hospital bed, where the janitor makes another appearance, and walking through what looks like a post-apocalyptic version of Possum Springs. Finally, Mae wakes up in her bed at home, and walks, still injured from her brush with the cult, to Greg's apartment. It's a relief to see her upright, and it's even more comforting to see her back with the gang. Over some pizza, they reveal that it was Aunt Molly and another cop, probably Dan McConnell if you see my theory videos, who pulled her out of the woods and brought her home. With the knowledge that the cult is still out there and keeping an eye on her and her comrades, Mae decides to spend the night at the apartment, where she has a heart-to-heart on the couch with your preferred companion, either B or Greg. In this heart-to-heart, Mae finally opens up about the killer incident and connects it to her experiences at college. It's a huge moment for her. After the killer incident, Mae was sent to a therapist, Dr. Hank. But he's kind of a quack. He's not only the town's therapist, he's also its family doctor and its dentist. There's no way he's competent at all of these disciplines, and honestly, he might not be good at any of them. Greg mentions that he messed up one of his fillings, and journaling is Dr. Hank's solution to just about anyone's mental health problems, as evidenced by the fact that Summers is doing it too, even though she's struggling with something completely different. All of this is to say that I don't think Mae has ever had a real therapy session, and I don't think she's ever really opened up to anyone about what happened when she attacked Andy Cullen with a bat. So this is a watershed moment for her, and an expression of just how comfortable she feels with your preferred companion. After all these years, she finally feels safe enough with someone to share the full scope of her trauma. After your preferred companion falls asleep, the hidden purpose of this heart-to-heart is revealed. The truth is, this was her way of saying goodbye. Because she isn't just ready to talk about the killer incident and her episodes of depersonalization, she's ready to bring this journey to an end. She knows that it's her that the cult is after, and that somehow everything she's been dealing with, her mental illness, her dreams, and the mystery of Ide and the Harfest kid, is all connected. So she ventures out into the woods once more, determined to confront the cult on her own. She finds Ide waiting for her, and calls him out about everything I just mentioned. He doesn't respond, at which point Mae is ready to throw hands. But before she can do so, the gang comes to her rescue. Much like the heart-to-heart and the dream segment in the church, it's an expression of just how much her friends care about her and want to protect her here at the end of her journey. Despite the bizarre peril facing her, they want to be there for her, to stand by her side and see it through to the end. It's also one of two wonderfully done Deus Ex Machina or rescue moments during the finale, which is one of my all-time favorite writing tropes, so it's really cool to see it here, especially with Greg leading the charge with his crossbow. Down in the mines, Mae confronts the cult, where all of the game's themes coalesce. She learns that the cult has been active in the town since the economy collapsed, and that they make periodic sacrifices to the Black Goat, who they believe lives at the bottom of a massive, bottomless hole in the mine. The hole at the center of everything, just as the Sky Cat said. The cult also reveals that Mae has the glimmer, a special connection to the Black Goat, which explains the dreams she's been having where she astral projects to other realms. During the unnamed cult leader's rant, she even has an episode of disassociation, connecting the Black Goat to that part of her backstory as well. Finally, Mae learns that Casey was one of the cult's victims, tying up the game's final narrative thread. Just as you'd expect, this revelation escalates the situation significantly, and nearly leads to Greg firing off his crossbow at the cultists. The cult ends up letting Mae go with an offer to join them. They need new blood. They're getting older, despite the benefit of good health afforded to them by the Black Goat, and eventually will need the young people of Possum Springs to take over for them. As Mae exits the elevator, she expresses some level of sympathy for the cult. She never quite finishes the thought, but I've always suspected that what she was going to get at here is that the cult is holding on to what they can and failing to move on. They think they're at the end of everything and are holding on to anything, just as she has throughout her life, with things like her youth and the memory of her grandfather. It's then that Ide, unable to accept the cult leader's generous treatment of Mae, appears in the elevator and attacks our protagonist. Your preferred companion will come to her rescue, and Mae will kick herself free from Ide. During this scuffle, Ide's helmet will be knocked off his head, revealing that he's a cat. I've long believed that Ide is intended to be a mirror image of Mae. He too has the glimmer, and perhaps that's why he attacked Mae here, because he feared that the cult would eventually replace him with her. The reveal that he's a cat, for me, cements that connection. The elevator comes down on Ide, severing his arm, some poetic justice for whoever lost one to the cult at the beginning of the game, and causing the mine to cave in. Deep in the depths of the mine, we reach the true climax of Mae's character arc, as she has a final confrontation with the Black Goat itself. Here, she acknowledges the Black Goat as the source of her mental illness, her depression, and the episodes of depersonalization, and then declares that she will no longer be controlled by it. She says that after the killer incident, she repressed her anger and lived in fear of having another outburst, or losing anything at all. But now, she wants to feel the whole range of human emotions, to embrace her personality for all of its flaws, and feel loss again. Because if she feels loss when something ends, when someone moves on, or a friend dies, then it means that it mattered. Finally, she says that though she knows she won't be free of the Black Goat and its impact on her forever, all she needs is to be free of it right now. In my very first video, I talked about why all of this is so fitting, why it's so appropriate for an eldritch, Lovecraftian entity to be at the heart of Mae's mental illness and her episodes of depersonalization. My views on many things related to Night in the Woods have changed since those early days, but my feelings on this haven't changed one bit. When you're dealing with mental illness, it can be hard to explain it to anyone. No one is in your head but you. You can't share your pain in any tangible way with another person. If we could, I'm sure the world would be a much kinder, gentler place, because we'd all be able to understand what someone like Mae goes through on a day-to-day basis, and society could appropriately respond to everyone's needs. Mental illness feels eldritch in its power over you, in its strength and scope, and the way you feel at times powerless to resist it. That's why it's so perfect for the Black Goat to be at the heart of all this. Here, in her final confrontation with it, Mae is quite literally telling her mental illness to fuck off. And that's something that all of us who struggle with anxiety, depression, or depersonalization wish we could do. There is also another way to look at all of this. This is trending into theory territory, which I usually steer away from in these analysis videos, but I believe that Mae's struggles with the Black Goat and the cult are an echo of her grandfather's battle with oppressive bosses back when he was with the Tooth Society, and that he too had the glimmer. If you're interested in hearing more about this, I'd recommend checking out this video from last September, where I connected all of these plot threads together. It's just a theory, but I really do think there's ample evidence that this struggle is generational in nature. Mae then wakes up from this vision and rejoins her friends. But the matter of how to escape from the mine remains. They end up finding a way out through a well, the same well, I suspect, that was mentioned in the Harfest play. Mae climbs to freedom using her cat skills, in a scene that always reminds me of Batman's escape from the prison in The Dark Knight Rises. Both moments are all about the protagonist overcoming the odds and putting the past behind them. For Mae, this is all about her symbolically overcoming the Black Goat, the cult, and her battles with mental illness one more time, and coming out of it as a hero to her friends. They saved her by coming to her rescue with Ide, supported her through thick and thin throughout the game, and now it's her chance to save them. In this way, this final moment displays a tremendous amount of growth for Mae. Whether or not you took the adventurous path with Greg, or the tough love path with B, she has learned, grown, and changed. She's not just benefiting from her relationships with her closest friends, she's supporting and helping them as well. In this case, it's in a very literal way. Without her, they'd have no way of escaping the mine. With an assist from Germ, Mae rescues her friends and tosses some dynamite down the well, ending this saga of her life by collapsing the mine, trapping the cult, and closing off the hole at the center of everything. When Mae gets home, she hops on Messenger and delivers a monologue that sums up the larger thematic purpose of what happened down the mines with the cult. The cult is now literally trapped, but even before that, they were trapped by their own ideology and clinging to a version of Possum Springs that, in truth, never really existed in the first place. Yes, the economy of the town was better during the time of the mines and the factories, and no one would argue that more jobs would be a bad thing. But the fact that the Tooth Society was needed to keep the bosses in line suggests that this era was not, in fact, great for everyone. What took place at the Possum Jump Massacre speaks to this as well. But the cult ignores all of that in favor of nostalgia and rose-colored glasses. And now that the tide has rolled out and the economy has collapsed, so many people are stuck in Possum Springs along with them. Mae doesn't want to be like them. She wants to move on, both from the burdens of this small town in the Rust Belt and from everything that's been dragging her down. From her mental illness, the killer incident, and the economic hardship facing her family. It's a bit of a rambling rant, but it's full of hope for the future. And though we'll never get a Night in the Woods 2, I will always wonder about whether or not Mae would have been able to make good on this dream of a better tomorrow for her and her friends. In the epilogue, the first snow of the season falls on Possum Springs. It's a cathartic moment. Mae loves snow, and it's another sign that things are moving forward for her in all respects. Weird autumn and the long fall is over, and winter is here. She'll have a chance to check in with all of the game's minor characters, like Pastor K and Lori M, and resolve some of the lingering side quests, such as the mystery of the tooth with her dad Stan. It's a beautiful segment, but my favorite moment might be this one right here, when Mae finds out that a taco shop is moving in where Possibilities used to be. Possum Springs has stagnated and failed to grow, much like Mae. It's held on to the past and feared change, just like our protagonist. But now a new business is moving in and providing one of the town's most beleaguered residents with a steady job. If an old mine and factory town can have some hope for a brighter future, unburdened by its past, then the same surely is true for Mae. This theme dominates the game's final segment. At the party barn, Mae will talk with your preferred companion, B or Greg, before the rest of the group joins her. She'll express hope for the future, and in B's ending echo what she said to the Black Goat, that nothing will save her forever, but that many things can save her today. And if I were to distill the importance of Mae's character down to a single phrase, it'd be that one right there. Throughout Night in the Woods, we see Mae deal with a whole plethora of issues. Mental illness, the Black Goat, family struggles, economic hardship, social awkwardness, depersonalization. These are big problems that can't simply be defeated with a silver bullet or a quick fix. The day after the game ends, Mae's still going to have depression. The Black Goat is an eldritch being, so it might still be out there. Her family still has healing to do. The Borowskis might end up losing their home. Mae's still going to put her foot in her mouth, and she's still going to have episodes of depersonalization. None of that is going to go away forever. But it doesn't have to. You don't have to beat your demons forever, because you can't simply erase something like depression or debt. You just need to outlast them. You just need something to save you today. I don't know that I'd call Mae someone to aspire to. She does a lot of things that I wouldn't recommend doing yourself. But I'd certainly call her relatable. Though you yourself will, hopefully, never deal with the cornucopia of issues she does, there's surely one on that list that you can relate to. You might not know what it's like to deal with depersonalization, but you might know what it's like to have a troubling family dynamic or say the wrong thing in social situations. And like everyone who's ever dealt with such hardships, you probably looked for the perfect solution to your problem, the magical path that will put your troubles to rest for good. But the truth is, such a thing doesn't exist. Nothing will save you forever. But as Mae herself showed us on that fateful night in the woods, a lot of things can save you for just one day. Things like good friends, supportive community members, or a well-placed stick of dynamite. And that's what makes Mae Borowski so important to this incredible game. Thank you for watching my longest video to date and the final chapter in my Night in the Woods character analysis series. It's been a long road, and I want to express my sincere gratitude to all of you who have watched, commented, and followed along in my first 2 years here on YouTube. Whether you just started watching my videos last week or been with me from the beginning, know that I appreciate you so much and that your support really does mean the world to me. This is the end of my character analysis series, but it's not the end of my Night in the Woods coverage. I will be continuing to cover other games that interest me, but Night in the Woods will always be the cornerstone game of this channel, and you can expect videos on it at least once a month. But with this series done, what will those videos be about? Well, for those of you looking for lore, I'll be dropping a series of videos on the constellations, both those from Longest Night and those in the main game, that are featured in the Dust Stars segment with Mr. Chazikov and the one up on Possum Jump with Angus. In those videos, I'll be analyzing the mythology behind the constellations and comparing them to legends from our own world. I'll also be making a shift to what YouTube likes to call hero content, topics that people will always come back to or look for. This includes breakdowns of the B and Greg path, so we can weigh the positives and negatives of each, as well as an upcoming ending explained video for the game. My ending explained videos for Silent Hill, Elden Ring, and Life is Strange are some of my most popular content, and I figure it's about time I do the same for this channel's main game, so be on the lookout for that sometime in January. And at some point, I'll be doing long-form videos like this one about the main cast members, Greg, B, Angus, and Casey. Unfortunately, as we know, there's really no hope for Night in the Woods 2, but I do think that the game will be remastered someday. And whenever that happens, I'd love to cover those amazing characters the same way I did with Mae in this one. I'll also be dropping a long-form video on the cult, summarizing all my findings, but that's going to have to wait a bit. It's a big undertaking, and I'm hoping to get a bunch of commissioned art and maybe even some animations to really make it feel like something of a lore movie. So don't worry, Night in the Woods fans. This series might be in the books, but Night in the Woods will always be at the heart of this channel, and I can't wait to get to work on more amazing videos for this incredible community. And on that note, if you are interested in supporting the channel, the best thing you can do is become a YouTube channel member or support me on Patreon. I know that not everybody has the money to spend in that regard, and if you can't, I totally understand. But if everybody who subscribes to this channel pledged even $1, I would probably be able to quit my job and do this full time, or at least start thinking about it in a serious way. So if it's something that you might be able to do, if you can even support $1, it would go a huge way towards helping me and helping me to make more great content for Night in the Woods far into the future. And if you are still watching this video, then another thing that would be incredibly helpful to me would be sharing this video as far and wide as you possibly can. I know that there are more than 7,500 Night in the Woods fans out there, and I'd like all of them to know that not only is this community still alive and well, but that I have plans to make many, many more videos on this incredible game. Thanks again for watching. Huge thanks to Wolf.Godwin and Allan Naslund, both of whom provided their incredible music for this video. Please check out their music by following the links down below in the description box. Huge thanks to my man Jordi Jaen Moreno for providing all of the art for my channel. Be sure to check out his portfolio at the link below. Big shout out to all my silver and gold tier YouTube channel members and Patreon subscribers, including James Pruitt, Corey Matson, Gustavo Balabi, Lil Caesar, Reed, Bethonian, Faith G, and Anna Novakova, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. See you guys next time.